In this lab I'm going to show you how to configure DTP. DTP stands for Dynamic Trunking Protocol. It's the second kind of trunking option that's available when you want to trunk between two switches. The first one is static trunking. So with DTP it's an auto negotiation of a trunk, and it is the Cisco default when you have an unconfigured switch. So this switch and this switch here have a default of DTP already. The problem is they're both set to auto mode, and that's not going to enable a trunk. One of the switches has to be set for desirable mode, and with desirable mode what happens is the switch sends DTP frames to the neighbor switch to request setup of the trunk. So in this example here I've got two VLANs, VLAN 10 on host 1 and VLAN 11 on host 2, and there's the same VLANs over on switch 2 with their servers. So VLAN 10, because this is a layer 2 topology, host 1 can only communicate with server 1, host 2 can only communicate with server 2. There's no routing, so it is a layer 2 topology, and however with the trunk we do have to permit the VLANs across the trunk. So the first step in setting up DTP is selecting a switch. So I'm going to start with switch 1. Start with enable and configure terminal. The VLANs are already configured on the switch interfaces, so I'm just going to go right to the trunk interface that I want to set up, and that'll be 2.2/1 that connects to switch 2. So we'll go interface FA21. The first command, I'm going to make this for desirable mode on this switch, so it will send DTP frames to switch 2. So the command is switch port mode dynamic desirable. So that says set it to desirable mode to send DTP frames. The next thing I want to do is I want to change the non-default native VLAN. I want to change it to a non-default from the default of 1 for security purposes. Switch port trunk native VLAN 100. So as long as the VLAN's available, you can use any available VLAN for the native VLAN, as long as it's available, and that'll send management packets like CDP, for example, across the trunk untagged. So it's not part of any VLAN, it goes untagged. And the next thing to do is I want to tell it to allow VLAN 10 and 11 across the trunk. So I'm going to type switch port trunk allow VLAN 10 and 11. Does not allow them across the trunk. That's all there is to it. I'm going to copy run to start to update the startup configuration. Now I want to go to switch 2 and do the same thing. Now in this example here, this is switch 2, it's the neighbor switch. So configure terminal. So I'm going to go to interface FA2/1. And I mentioned before that the default for DTP is auto mode. It's the DTP is the default for the switch itself if it's unconfigured, and auto mode is the default mode. So I don't really have to configure this, but I want to show you the command, what the command actually is. Dynamic auto. Sometimes you want to change the configuration if you've changed it to some other mode, to desirable mode, to auto. So switch port mode dynamic auto. So that changes it there. It doesn't really change it, but it makes sure it's set to auto. Switch port mode, switch port trunk, and I'm going to change the native VLAN to 100. They have to match between switches. If they don't, you'll get a native VLAN mismatch. So it's important that they match. And I'm going to allow 10 and 11 across the trunk. So allow VLAN 10 and 11. That's done there. I want to update the startup configuration. So next time the device starts, it will have the correct configuration. So that's all there is to it. Now I want to verify that the DTP trunk has been auto-negotiated. So we'll go back to switch 1, show interfaces, trunk. So right here I'm on switch 1, so mode is desirable now. It's either desirable on or on for static. If it's DTP, it'll be desirable or auto. The N stands for negotiated trunk, so encapsulation's the same. The N signifies that it's a negotiated trunk. It is trunking, and native VLAN is 100, and VLANs allowed on the trunk are 10 and 11, so that's correct. Go to switch 2, then do the same thing. Make sure the native VLANs are matching. They are. It's 100 as well. And this is set for auto mode, and it's allowing 10 and 11, so that's all correct. It is on the correct port 2.1. That is the trunk interface on switch 2 and switch 1. That's all working correctly. Now I want to verify end-to-end connectivity. Now for host 1, I want to ping server 1. Server 1 is 1.2 and host 1 is 1.1. So I'm going to send a ping. I'm going to ping 192.168.1.2, and I'm getting replies from that. So server 1 is getting, so I'm getting replies from server 1. I go to host 2, I want to be able to configure ping server 2. So that's 2.2, this is 2.1. They're in the same subnet. So go to command prompt, ping 192.168.2.2, and reply. So there is connectivity between host 2 and server 2. If I went to host 2 and tried to ping server 1, it would not work. Host 2 and server 1 are in different VLANs, and as a result, different subnets. So you can see I'm already getting timeouts. It's just not connected there. And 4 timeouts. So sent for, received none, lost for, 100% lost. So that concludes the DTP lab.